VBA Day 4. Today we are going to discuss the following: Introduction to for loop, the immediate window, nested for loop, introduction to Excel object hierarchy, for each loop, do while when, and do until loop, comparison between for and other loops. I have written a small piece of code here. A for loop has three parts: start, the end, and the increment or decrement. This increment or decrement is optional, so if you don't provide this increment or decrement, by default it will take as 1, and this is also optional, so you can also remove this. So let me execute it using F8. So initially the value of int loop will be by default 0, so after execution of this line int loop will become 1. Debug.print displays the output of a variable in the immediate window. This is the immediate window, and in order to bring this immediate window, you can go to view and click on immediate window. So this window is used for debugging or displaying the value of any variable at runtime. It displays the value of int loop. Now this line next int loop will cause the value of int loop to increase by 1 as we have provided pep1, and the control jumps to this line. So basically this line is executed only once. So now debug.print int loop, so it will print the value of int loop in the immediate window. Now again next loop, so it will increment the value of int loop by 1. Now int loop becomes 3. So similarly it will go on displaying all the value of int loop up till 10. And now when int loop is 10, so since 10 is the terminating condition, so this loop will end. So loops are used to accomplish repetitive tasks, and this is the basic syntax of for loop. I have written another example. So it will display all the even numbers from 10 to 1, but in a reverse order. So before executing this, let me clear this immediate window. Now let me execute it using F8. So again initially the value of int loop will be 0, which is by default. After execution of this line, which will be executed only once, so int loop will become 10. Now debug.print int loop will display the value in the immediate window. Next int loop will cause the value of int loop to decrement by 2, since we have provided a negative number. So int loop has become 8, and so on. It will keep on displaying the value of int loop until 2. So now int loop will become 0 and the loop will terminate, since the terminating condition is 1 and int loop is 0, so the loop has terminated. I have written another example to do the sum of first 10 natural numbers. Before that, let me again clear this immediate window. So I have used another variable called int sum, which will hold the sum of the numbers. Let me execute it. So int sum equals to int sum plus int loop. Initially int sum is 0 and int loop has become 1, so int sum will hold 1. Next int loop will become 2, and int sum equals to int sum plus int loop. So int sum was 1, So 1 plus 2, now int sum has become 3. Next int loop will become 3. Int sum will become 3 plus current value of int loop, which is 3. So int sum has become 6. Now next int loop will become 4, and int sum will become 6 plus 4, 10. So this way int sum will keep on adding the numbers, and once this loop is executed, the value of int sum will be displayed in a message box. So it is displaying 55. Now let us validate the result. So if I select this number, and you can see here the sum is showing 55. So here is the sum. I have written another example to display the sum of square of first 10 natural numbers. So in this, the only modification I have made is I have multiplied int loop with int loop to get the square. So after execution of this, so it displays 385. So let us validate the result. So if we select this number, you can see here the sum is showing 385. Now let us look into nested for loop. So a nested for loop is a for loop within a for loop. So the working mechanism of the for loop remains the same. So let me quickly execute this example and show it to you. So I have used two variables here for the two for loops. So int loop will get initialized to 1, and int loop 2 will get initialized to once again. So int loop 2 will run from 1 to int loop 1. So you can see that I haven't provided this step, so which is optional. So if you don't provide the step, by default it is 1. So if you execute this, so in this debug.print I have used a semicolon. So earlier what was happening with debug.print is that whenever debug.print was getting executed, the output was showing up in a new line. So using a semicolon makes the output to display on the same line. Let me execute it. It is showing 1. So next int loop becomes 2, and this loop will terminate, because in int loop 2 the terminating condition was int loop 1, which is 1. Now debug.print simply causes the cursor to move into a new line, so that the next output is generated in a new line. So next int loop 1 is 1, so it becomes 2, and again this inner for loop will execute from 1 to int loop 1, which is 2. So from 1 to 2. So debug.print int loop 2, so it will display 1 and then 2. So again debug.print is executed, which will cause the cursor to move to the next line. Similarly, again the inner loop will execute from 1 to int loop 1, which is 3. Currently int loop 1 is 3. So this loop will execute 3 times. So similarly, if I execute this using F5, so you can see that we will get a pattern. So similarly, as an assignment, you may try this program to generate the following pattern. Now let us look into Excel object hierarchy. So at the very top we have application object. So whenever you type Excel from the run window, you are basically opening up an instance of Excel. So an application can have multiple workbooks, a workbook can have multiple worksheets, and a worksheet can have multiple range or cells. Now we want to display a value in this range A1. So let us see how you can do it. So we have to write something like this. So this workbook refers to the current workbook where we are writing this code. So this workbook dot worksheets, and the name of the worksheet is Excel hierarchy range a1 dot value equals to high. So if I execute it using F8, see, after this line is executed, we will have a value of high in this cell. We can also do it using a little different syntax. So instead of range, we can provide cells. So cells takes two parameters, the row number and the column number. The first one is row number and the second parameter is the column number. So if I execute this line, see, the value has become by. So there is yet another way of doing the same thing. So for that purpose, we can use something called the code name. So if I click on this SHT demo, and if I press F4 to bring up the property window, which is already visible, so you can see here the name is SHT demo, and also there is another name property called Excel hierarchy. So this name is the code name. So by default it would be something like, say, sheet 1 or sheet 3, but in this case I have changed it to SHT demo. So you can simply type the code name SHT demo dot, and if you press dot, you can see this IntelliSense comes up, and I have specified a particular cell number 25, and I want to display a value of hello. So if I press F8, you can see this particular cell now contains the value. Similarly, you can use this range property, and you can see I have concatenated these two values here, so it is becoming C2. So this was just to show you that everything is possible. So if I press F8, so C2 will also have the value. Now another thing that you can do with range property is that you can specify a range of cells. So if I press F8, you can see from A1 to B5 all these cells contains the value hello. Now let us quickly look at the difference between the range and the cells property. So range property takes a single string parameter, which is the address of the range, and cells property takes two long type parameters, the row number and the column number. So using a range property, we can access a single cells as well as we can access multiple cells, but using cells property, we can only access a single cell. So there is a lot of things we can do using the range property, which we will look in our later sessions. Now let me execute this line. So I want to see this, I want to see the parent of cells 11 in SHT demo. So parent is a property and name is yet another property. So it will display Excel hierarchy. You can see the name of the sheet. Now if I write something like parent.parent, so I want to see the parent of parent, so it will display the name of the workbook, and this should display Microsoft Excel, the application. So basically it is displaying the Excel object hierarchy. Now let us look into for each loop. So using for each loop, we can loop through items in a collection. So basically a collection is something which contains multiple items. Say for instance, a workbook contains multiple worksheets. So a workbook is a collection of worksheets. An application can contain multiple workbook. So you can say an application is a collection of workbooks. So using this example, let me display the name of all the worksheets. So I have declared a variable here of type worksheet. So these are extended data types. So we have learned about this basic data types such as integer, long, string, double, and we have this extended data types. So we have multiple extended data types such as worksheet, workbook, range, etc. So we can create our own data type using a class, so which we will look in our later sessions. So the syntax for each loop is for each variable name in this workbook dot, if you press dot you can see worksheets. So worksheets is basically a collection, and you don't need to provide the increment or decrement here. So this next wcase each will iterate through all the worksheets contained within this workbook. So I have assigned the same procedure to this shape. So if I go to assign macro and edit, it will take me to this example. So if I execute this macro by clicking on this shape, so one by one it will display the name of all the sheets. You can see this for each loop is the name of sheet. I click OK, then loops 50. Similarly, I have written two more examples. So if I click on this shape, it will display the name of all the workbooks within this application, Day4 and book 2. So I have opened up another book named book 2 within the same instance of Excel. But if I open another instance of Excel, and you can see here the name is book 1, but if I click on this, it will display Day4 and book 2 only, because book 1 belongs to another instance of Excel, not this Excel application on which you have written this code. So I will show you the code for this. Click on edit. So I have declared a variable of type workbook, and I am looping through all the workbooks within the application. So application.workbooks, and I am displaying the name of the workbook. Similarly, we can display the name of all the shapes within a worksheet. So if I click on the right click on this shape, you can see the name of the shape is displayed here. So there are a lot of things which we can do using for loop and for each loop. So for each loop works on collection. So if you are finding it difficult to understand what is a collection, so we will see lots of example of those in later sessions, and you will get a better hang of it. Now let us look into the other forms of loops. So we have this do while, when, and do until loop. The syntax for do while loop is the do while followed by the condition and the body of the loop, and finally the loop keyword. Similarly, we have this while when loop. So in while when we use WEND instead of loop, and we have do until loop, which is more or less similar to the do while loop. So let us look at an example. So I want to display these first 10 natural numbers. So if I execute it, so this is the initialization, and it will check the condition int loop less than equals to, so this will be 10. So if I select this, this condition is true, so it will enter the loop. So the loop will execute till this condition is true. So it will display, this is the increment, and it will once again check the condition int loop has become 2 now, 2 less than equals to 10, yes. So it will go on displaying all the values till 10, and now it will check int loop has become 10 plus 1 11, so 11 less than equals to 10, so which is false, so the loop will terminate. So similarly, we can do the pattern example using this loop. And this is the pattern example written using the do while loop. Let me simply execute it. So you can see it is displaying the pattern. Now the while when loop, so you can simply modify the do while loop to make it the while when loop. Let me clear this. If I press F5, so it is displaying the same. This is a do while loop which simply displays the first 10 natural numbers. If I press F5, it will show me the following output. So there is another way of writing the do while loop. You can simply place the while condition here at the end. Let me clear this, and if I execute this, it will show me the same result. So there is one advantage of putting the while condition at the end. So suppose this condition is something which is false, greater than 10, and if I put this condition at the beginning, so the loop will not execute. So if I press F8, so int sum is 1 and 1 greater than 10 is false. So this will not execute, this will not enter the loop and it will terminate. But if I place the same condition at the end, and now if I execute this, it will enter the loop, it will execute, int sum will become 2, and now it will check the condition which is false and it will terminate. So using a do while loop and placing the condition at the end, we can ensure that the loop executes at least once. A do until loop is almost similar to a do while loop, except that it works till the condition is false. So if we change this to do until, it will not enter the loop body because this condition is true and the loop will terminate. So in order to make the do until loop work, we will have to reverse the condition greater than 10. This condition is false and so it will enter the loop body. And if I press F5, so you can see it will display the first 10 natural numbers. So similar to the do while loop, we can also put the condition at the end. So the do until loop is almost similar to the do while loop, but the difference between the do while and the while when loop is that in do while or in the do until loop, you can write something like exit do to prematurely terminate the do while loop or the do until loop. So if I execute this, it will enter, but once it encounters this statement, the loop will terminate. Whereas it is not possible to prematurely terminate a while when loop. So I would recommend that mostly use the do while loop instead of while when or the do until loop. And it is also possible to prematurely terminate the for loop using the command called exit for. And the main difference between a for loop and the other loops is that for loop runs on condition which is numeric, but the do while or the other loops can have conditions which are, say, you can put a string condition, say for instance name equals to Sujoy, where name is a variable. So this is an arbitrary example, it will not work here, but I just wanted to tell you the difference. Another advantage of for loop is that we can loop through collections using the for each loop. With this, we have come to the conclusion of today's day 4 session. Thanks for watching.